So ever since being a little bit more open on platforms like this, as well as a couple other social media outlets, I started noticing a trend with the kinds of books that are recommended to artists. And things like Save the Cat. There was another book that was recommended to writers as well as a lot of other artists, quite a lot. Realized that there was an Audible. I had an extra credit to use, so I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Well, it definitely didn't follow the hype. Welcome back to the crypt. Today I want to talk about The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. Now, right off the gate, I will acknowledge that I listened to the Audible version, and the Audible version only has 3 chapters, and I'm not positive, but I think the ebook has more chapters than that. So I don't know what's going on with that. There were a couple people in comment sections that seem to imply that the Audible is a ripoff and it actually doesn't give you the full book, even though there's nothing to indicate it's abridged, nothing to indicate you're getting less than the full book. So I don't know if it's just organized differently and it seems like you're getting less or what. I don't know. Honestly, I don't want more of this Audible. I am totally fine with it only being 3 chapters, because I can tell you out of those 3 chapters, I was unhappy throughout most of it with a lot of the things I was hearing, and I just want to get into it a little bit. Real quick, a little disclaimer. Outside of ethical concerns, there is no really a wrong way to go about doing art or creating art pieces. Now, there are wrong ways to go about putting that art for public display. There are social rules and constructs that should be followed, as well as legal laws differing between countries and even counties that you do need to keep in mind when you are selling artworks. But when it comes to just creating the art in and of itself, it's far more open free game. And the reason I want to specify that is the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about, these 3 issues, aren't really a reflex in saying you can't do these things or these things will never work for anybody. Obviously, some of these techniques that the book talks about work for other people, otherwise it wouldn't have gotten popular. But I think this book is aged quite badly, and not just in terms of being politically correct, however you decide to interpret that one, but just in terms of how it is addressing a lot of these problems. And I'm going to get into it, but I just want to specify that I don't think there's a wrong way to unblock your creative self necessarily. Some people use really bizarre methods, and if it works to unblock you creatively, go for it. So long as, again, you are doing things legally, safely, and ethically, then go for it. So let's start the conversation with our 3 issues: the troublemaker, materialistic solutions, and manifestation. You guys know I'm going to talk about that manifestation, don't you? Troublemakers. This makes up a huge portion of an entire chapter. She goes on and on and on about how there are certain people in an artist's life that will, quote unquote, hold you back or keep your vibes down. She uses some really quite antiquated language about it. I kind of got what she was trying to say, and I will specify that there are situations where you are surrounded by people who can make it very difficult to create, as well as just you being in situations that are very unfortunate that can make it difficult to create. However, for a lot of her recommendations on how to, 1, identify the troublemakers, and 2, how to treat them, it's a little problematic. 1, identifying the troublemakers, a lot of the traits she talked about were things that some of them I could kind of understand, such as people who constantly talk about you behind your back, that kind of thing. Like, I get it. But some of the things were like people who don't give 100% of their own creativity, or people who themselves are blocked. Her recommendation to cut these people out of your life was insanely brutal. For me personally, I am surrounded by artists who are both very much pursuing their careers, as well as artists who are stuck and have been stuck for years. I'm surrounded by both kinds of people. And what's really interesting to me is that people would see the individuals who are struggling and say, this person should be completely cut out of my entire life. Because yeah, that's gonna help them a lot. Now I get it. It can be difficult when you're around people, especially people who are very depressive or have high anxiety, or people who are neurodivergent, and it can be a little draining. I get it. I do. I am a lot to some people. Totally understandable. But the idea of cutting these people off entirely, 1, that's very anti-mental illness, and 2, it's also quite ableist, because some of the attributes she talks about are attributes that neurodivergent people are going to have. So there's just it's very little in terms of understanding. However, like I said, I kind of get it. If you are in a position where your own mental health and safety are on the line and you literally don't have the capacity to help others, then pulling back is probably a good idea. But this is where I take issue. You should be pulling back and making healthy boundaries, not necessarily cutting people out of your life entirely. The wording that she uses in this chapter with troublemakers is both insanely demeaning to others and takes an authority standpoint as someone who would know how to properly diagnose people, which I found very off-putting, considering that I'm pretty sure this author does not have any actual credentials to be able to engage in this kind of conversation. This is more of a conversation for a trained therapist or counselor or psychiatrist, not necessarily a layman. Not to mention the fact that as a white person, I understand that like looking at stuff like this and being able to cut people off who don't serve me is a lot easier for me because I have a lot of resources that I can use to continue on with life regardless of whether or not other people are in it. It's difficult, but I can do it. Whereas for many people, specifically people of color, if they are cutting people off, especially people from their core ethnic or cultural background, that can create a lot of problems because they could end up cutting off a lot of the communities that connect them to their heritage and culture. You can't just cut people off because they're problematic. In many cases, you need to instead learn how to create healthy boundaries to keep yourself safe. Cutting people off isn't always the answer you think it is. Now, I do believe Julia did mention boundary setting once or twice, but what it seemed like she was saying most of the time is that if anyone seems to be even a little bit jealous of you, you should completely cut them out of your life, which just seemed really brutal. And I know some people are going to be like, well, that's what you need. But again, that's a very privileged position. Again, a lot of people do not have very many networks or contacts. If they lose the few contacts they have, they lose everything. You can't just get rid of your contacts and be okay. For a lot of people, they literally can't. They would be on the street. Like, sometimes you have to learn ways to deal with people who are not the best friends in the world, but you learn to deal with them as best you can and handle your own behavior and make boundaries that keep you as safe as you can in those circumstances. It's not an ideal situation, but it's what a lot of people have to deal with. This book doesn't seem to consider those kinds of people at all. It seems to only consider a very privileged position of someone who doesn't have to rely on others, but just likes others around. It's a convenience. My second issue was consumption, and materialistic consumption in particular. A lot of her chapters where she talks about things like getting out as an artist or having artist dates, a lot of them involved spending money in some form or engaging with capitalistic things like buy a new pair of socks, buy a new hat. And it was just really, really weird mentality. As someone who comes from a family that didn't have a lot of money, you couldn't just go wherever you wanted. Even doing things like using the car to go to the next city over cost gas money. That's expensive if you are on a low income household, or just you don't have a lot of money to spend in general for whatever reason, or you're handicapped. There are lots of things you just don't have access to. So relying on these very materialistic items in order to get you inspiration seems really bizarre to me. And before anyone mentions, well, she says like take a walk and other things and those are free. It's not free. That is again privilege, because time itself is money to the working class, specifically to those on poverty line. Every amount of spare time you have is important. And if I have to choose between taking a walk or getting writing done that could possibly get me some commission or other money that I need right away, guess what I'm going to choose to do first and foremost? I'm not going to choose the artist day. Being able to do these things takes time, effort, energy, as well as money more often than not. And all of those things are items of privilege. And my final point that I really struggled with was the manifestation stuff. Now, listen, I'm a witch. So I do deal with a certain amount of intention and manifestation, I guess, in some forms. However, I have massive issues with manifestation as a whole theology. And the reason for this is it puts everything in the world on the shoulders of an individual. And here's the thing. Let me explain kind of my thinking process on it. If I wake up in the morning and I have a very chipper attitude about the day, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of still sleepy a bit, but you know what? I'm going to do my best to have a really great day today. It's going to be nice. We've got nice sunny weather for once. We don't get that often. We're pretty happy about it. Let's go do our best today. If I leave my house with that attitude, the small inconveniences that pop up throughout the day, which always happen, inconvenient things like tiny little things happen to us all the time, those won't feel that bad because I have a pretty good attitude starting out. So I'm going to perceive those small inconveniences as small inconveniences. I'm not really going to feel that irritated by them generally. Now, by contrast, if I wake up and I just completely give in to the urge of, oh, I'm so tired, I really don't want to go, I really don't want to do this, I really, really hate this, I hate being up at this time, I hate leaving the house and walking this far to my job, blah, blah, blah. If I go out like that, all those small inconveniences that happen throughout the day are going to feel worse. They're going to feel bigger than they actually are, and they're all going to kind of pile up. So yes, to a certain extent, your viewpoint is going to change your perception of how you receive and respond to things throughout the day, which will in turn either make things worse or better depending on other factors. So I do think your thought process does have a certain level of power in your life. However, those small inconveniences aren't going to magically disappear because you have a positive attitude. The small inconveniences are still there. You're just perceiving them differently. So in that way, when it comes to things like manifestation, I do believe our minds are powerful in how we perceive the world around us, but I don't think it's going to magically alter the actual events that are happening to us. For example, this morning I woke up very, very chipper. I was going to get tons done. It was 6 a.m. and I was like, I'm going to get started on filming and stuff. And then internet was completely down, meaning I had a hard time accessing files and other things I needed. And I tried everything and it wasn't working. And thankfully it's up now, but it took 4 hours to get it working. And I didn't manifest that bad thing to happen. It just happened. And even though I had a good attitude starting the day, that didn't mean that I manifested a super productive day. It's not how that works. Bad things are going to happen in life regardless. And the problem with things like manifestation is they put a lot of the burden on the individual. Oh, your car broke down and you haven't been able to really get on your feet for a long time. Well, if you wish hard enough, if you try hard enough, manifestation, the way I like to describe it as someone who's a recovering Christian, is manifestation is diet Christianism. It really is. Because instead of using God, it uses terms like manifestation, the universe, the great creator, which is used, by the way, as a little side note. Julia uses this all the time in the text, and she says you don't have to think about God, you can create some other entity, but it pretty much boils down to, again, diet Christianity. Everything revolves around some outside entity doing things or interfering in the world, which simultaneously puts all the pressure off you and on you at the same time. The pressure is on you in the sense that, well, you just need to try harder, do better. But it also makes it seem as if people who just work really, really hard will be blessed by God. And that just is not true. I know multiple people in my life that are insanely next level hard workers. They are really, really hard workers. Wonderful work ethic. They try their best. They have good worldviews. They really try. And life just beats them to a pulp. That happens sometimes. Life just sometimes sucks. But if I were to look at manifestation, if I were to look at those kinds of things, that takes a darker turn real quick. And yes, I have read the literature about it. I've watched things like The Secret. I've tried to figure out this thing that people talk about to see if there's some argument I haven't heard. But I am still wildly uncomfortable with manifestation because of all of these issues. And I've never heard a satisfying answer that really explains this stuff in a way that makes sense. Instead, it just seems like Christianity 2.0, and I'm personally not here for it. Again, I think there's a certain amount of maneuvering I can do as a witch in some forms in this world, but I think they're a lot more limited than people think they are. And generally, a lot of them have more to do with my personal worldview and how I receive and respond to events, not necessarily changing how the world orders so events that I want come to me. It doesn't work like that. Like, and some witches I'm sure are going to argue with me in the comments, and that's fine. Y'all can have a different opinion. That's totally fine. I'm just saying that I feel like there are some major issues with manifestation as a thought process, and the fact that a lot of this book totes that if you just try hard enough, if you just work enough, if you just have a good enough attitude about writing, your writing will take off. And it's like, no. There are so many authors out there that tried so hard and weren't discovered till after they died. I mean, I guess manifestation worked in a way, but they're long dead, so who cares? You know what I mean? Like, they never benefited from all their hard labor. They died feeling unloved, unseen, and unwanted. But to people who have privilege, like white privilege, for example, manifestation's going to work a lot differently. If they really want it and they try hard enough, they'll probably get accepted because they're white and have privilege and have resources and support systems that a lot of other communities don't have. So getting into certain industries is a lot easier for them because they already have all those steps up. And that does matter. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if I didn't have the ability to have wonderful parents who were supportive to me in my early years and allowed me to stay at their house with a very low rent, I never would have been able to pay off my student loan and get to Japan. And I never would have had enough time to try to do my writing. And I wouldn't have had the encouragement to do my writing or the education to do my writing efficiently. All of those things are privileges I have that not everyone gets. So when you look at things like manifestation, it really only works for people who already have multiple legs up anyway. That's why it seems to work, because you already had a leg in the door to begin with. But someone who's completely locked out, well, they can 100% get in the door. A lot of luck is going to determine whether that door cracks open for them. Not necessarily skill, not necessarily hard work, although both those things are necessary. They're not the only things that will open that door. Lady luck is also required to a certain extent. And I am very hesitant to depend on things like manifestation to prompt Lady Luck to come to the door. She does not always listen to that, and honestly, I don't know if she even recognizes it, to be real with you. I think it's more likely it's completely random. Just my personal theory. But of course, this goes into belief, which is one of the main reasons I have with the book as a whole. So overall, my thoughts. There is a lot in this that I feel like some of it might be useful, like morning pages, which essentially is just brain dumping journaling in the morning. I mean, I personally have been doing it for over a month and I don't see huge benefits, so I've kind of like slowed my roll on it and I only really utilize it when I feel I need to. You know, teach their own. For some people, that's really useful practice. In the same way, for some people, they're living in conditions where a lot of people around them are very cruel, bully type people, and they do need to cut those people off because they're legitimately dangerous for their mental health. And cutting it off works. Everyone's different, and some of these things might work for you. But I think the thing that's missing in a lot of the discussions I see about this book is how insanely privileged all of these solutions are. Resources and networks that can survive cutting people off. You need money in order to engage with the world in a manner to re-up your inspiration. And you need to manifest your destiny. Just think about it enough and it'll happen. All of those things are such privileged views of art. And considering that the majority of artists are people in the higher percentile, it makes sense. Probably could have made this a longer video and had even more stuff to say, like the insanely problematic language of how she talks about other cultures, but you know what? There are a few other people that I've mentioned that out there, so I'll let them handle that one. But yeah, book hasn't aged well. That's for sure. And I think when it comes right down to it, if you want to heal your inner child and things like that, there are ways to go about that. But I think the best way is with therapy, or because therapy is also insanely privileged, unfortunately, by using methods that are supported by therapy. And therapy that works for you personally. So that's going to differ wildly depending on different people. And thankfully there are a lot of online resources, YouTube videos by certified individuals who talk you through these processes and techniques. Please use those. Not this book, but that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm looking forward to reading them. and have a great day. Hopefully better one than me when I was walking around reading this book. It made me mad.